check her bag. Yoon Se-ra stood at the head of the glass table. One manicured finger pointed directly at Maya. 18 executives sat frozen in their seats. Security personnel exchanged uncertain glances near the door. Nobody moved. Maya set down her pen. She did not look at Se-ra immediately. She looked around the room first, slowly, taking in every face, every pair of eyes that suddenly found somewhere else to be. Then she turned to Se-ra, and her voice came out completely flat. "There are 18 executives in this room," Maya said, "and somehow, I'm the only one you assumed stole it?" Se-ra smiled, cold, practiced, entirely without warmth. "You're an outsider, the newest person in this room." "No," Maya tilted her head slightly. "Let's be precise, Se-ra. I'm the only black woman in this room." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. One of the senior executives cleared his throat and looked away. Another shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Se-ra's smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes tightened. Maya reached down, lifted her leather handbag from the floor, and placed it in the center of the glass table with a quiet thud. "Search it." Security moved forward. They unzipped it, turned it over, checked every pocket, every lining. The room watched in complete silence. When they stepped back, their expressions said everything. Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The bag was completely empty. Sarah slammed her palm on the table. "She hid it before we walked in. Check the biometric safe." She was standing near it before the meeting started. From the far end of the table, Hyun-woo stood up. He had not spoken a single word since the meeting began. He rarely needed to. When Seo Hyun-woo moved, rooms rearranged themselves around him. He walked past the executives, past Se-ra, past the security detail, and stopped in front of the heavy biometric vault built into the boardroom wall. He pressed his thumb to the scanner. The locks disengaged in sequence. He pulled the handle, reached inside, and turned around. The obsidian file was in his hands. He looked at Se-ra. His expression did not change. His voice came out quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. "I locked it away myself, before this meeting even began." Se-ra's face went completely still, and then Hyun-woo dimmed the lights. "Before we continue, I want to ask you something. If someone accused you of stealing just because you looked different, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. And if you love stories where justice always catches up with the guilty, subscribe, because this is only the beginning." 3 weeks earlier, Maya Johnson had never heard of Seo Hyun-woo. She knew of the Seo Group the way everyone knew of it. A corporate empire so large it had its own gravitational pull, pulling industries, politicians, and old money into its orbit. What the public didn't know, and what Maya had quietly suspected from the financial patterns alone, was that underneath the legitimate empire ran something else entirely. A diamond distribution network, moving product across 6 continents, some of it clean, most of it not. She got the call on a Tuesday morning, no name on the phone. A car arrived at her apartment building 40 minutes later. The meeting took place in Hyun-woo's private office on the 43rd floor, a room with floor-to-ceiling glass on 2 sides and almost no furniture. He was standing when she walked in, looking out at the city below, hands clasped behind his back. He did not turn around immediately. "You dismantled the Choi Holdings fraud in 11 days, he said, still facing the window. Their legal team had buried the evidence across 14 subsidiary accounts. 13 days, Maya said, and it was 16 subsidiaries. He turned around then. He studied her face the way people study a contract before signing it, looking for the clause that will eventually cost them something. "Someone inside my organization is siphoning diamonds," he said. "They are funding something I haven't identified yet. If federal authorities find it before I do, everything collapses. The legitimate business, the other operations, everything. And you want me to find the source before that happens? I want you to find the source, document everything, and hand me names." He paused. "I was told you don't frighten easily." Maya looked at him evenly. "I was told the same thing about you. One of us is about to find out if it's true." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close to it. "There's one more thing," he said, walking toward his desk slowly. The person responsible may be someone with significant leverage over this organization, someone I cannot simply remove. You need to understand what that means for your own safety. Maya was quiet for a moment, then she said something she had never told a client before. She wasn't entirely sure why she said it then, except that something in the way he spoke made her feel that he was a man who understood what it meant to carry something heavy for a very long time. My father spent 15 years in prison for a corporate theft he didn't commit, she said. He died behind bars before they proved his innocence. That's why I do this, because when people like your executives lie, innocent people pay the price. I don't let liars win. Hyun-woo went very still. He looked at her for a long moment, absorbing something in her words that went beyond their professional context. Then he gave a single, slow nod. Find them, he said quietly. Maya started the next morning. She requisitioned 6 years of shipping manifests, internal transfer logs, communications records across every executive-level account, and cross-referenced them against customs declarations filed in 4 countries. She set up in a glass-walled office on the 38th floor and did not leave it for the first 4 days except to sleep. The hostility started on day 2. It wasn't loud. It never was with Se-ra. It was the kind of opposition that left no fingerprints. Documents Maya had requisitioned would arrive missing 3 pages. Conference rooms she had booked would suddenly be occupied. Staff members who had been cooperative on Monday would be distant and clipped by Wednesday, their eyes slightly averted, as though someone had spoken to them in between. In the elevators, Maya caught the whispers. She's not one of us. She doesn't understand how things work here. She's just using the victim angle to deflect from her own audit. Outsiders always come to take what we've built. Maya heard every word. She kept her face forward and her expression neutral, and once, in passing, she caught a fragment that didn't fit the rest. Something about Se-ra, still wearing her ring around like she's still getting married. Gone before Maya could place it, filed away without context. The moment the elevator doors opened, she walked back to her desk and worked harder. What Maya didn't know yet, what no one outside the family's inner circle knew, was the history sitting underneath every cold glance Se-ra had already started giving her from across the executive floor. 8 months earlier, Seo Hyun-woo walked into Yoon Se-ra's office, carrying a small black velvet box. She looked up from her desk and smiled automatically. "You're early." He placed the box in front of her. She opened it. Her engagement ring rested inside. She frowned. "What is this?" Hyun-woo looked at her for a long moment. "I know." 2 words, nothing more. The color drained from her face. "Hyun-woo." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask for an explanation. "You chose someone else." He turned toward the door. She hurried after him and caught his sleeve. "Please." He gently removed her hand. "Don't make me hear it twice." Then he walked away. The office door closed. Se-ra stood alone. Minutes later, she took the ring from the box and slowly slid it back onto her own finger. Hyun-woo and Se-ra had been engaged for nearly 2 years, the arrangement built by their families before either of them had a say in it. 2 corporate dynasties merging through a wedding instead of a contract. Hyun-woo had treated it the way he treated most obligations handed to him at birth. Necessary, manageable, survivable. 8 months earlier, Hyun-woo had discovered Se-ra's affair with an executive from a rival conglomerate. It had lasted for most of their engagement. The confrontation Maya would never know about lasted less than 2 minutes. By the time Hyun-woo walked out of that office, the engagement, and every future their families had planned, was over. What he couldn't do was remove her from the company. Her father had been vice chairman of Seo Group for over 25 years, with enough institutional power and enough leverage over the board that firing his daughter outright would have triggered a corporate war neither family could fully survive. So the 2 families brokered an ugly truce instead. The engagement was dead, Se-ra kept her title and her office, and any future claim to the Seo name died with it. The board called it a mutual separation. The tabloids called it scheduling conflicts. Inside Seo Group, nobody said either name aloud, but everyone noticed one thing. Se-ra never stopped wearing the ring. For Se-ra, the title meant nothing. She had never wanted to run a division. She had wanted to be Mrs. Seo, and every day she kept walking into that building with her old desk, and her old access badge was a day spent staring at exactly what she'd lost. So, quietly, she and her father started taking something back. Diamonds, skimmed in small enough quantities to stay under the radar of any single audit, routed through manifests her father had final sign-off on. Not greed, not exactly, leverage, a war chest. Enough capital, enough hidden assets, to eventually force a hostile takeover of the very company that had cast her aside. If she couldn't have Hyun-woo, she would have everything he was supposed to inherit instead. Maya, arriving 3 weeks later to audit shipping logs for an unrelated discrepancy, had walked directly into the middle of it without anyone telling her. On the 6th night, Maya had been at her desk for 12 straight hours. Shipping manifests were spread across 3 monitors, and she had been cross-referencing timestamps against biometric entry logs, chasing a pattern that kept slipping just out of reach. She had forgotten to eat. She had forgotten what time it was. She was so deep inside the numbers that she didn't hear the office door open. She only noticed 15 minutes later, a container of food sat beside her keyboard. High-end, carefully packed, still warm. She looked up at the empty doorway, then back at the food, and for a moment she just sat there with her hands in her lap, not moving. She ate alone. She didn't tell anyone about it. 2 nights later, she fell asleep at her desk without meaning to. The files were still open on her screen. Her head had dropped to her folded arms somewhere around 2 in the morning. She didn't feel the weight settle over her shoulders. She didn't wake up when Hyun-woo stood over her desk in the dim office, looking down at her with an expression his own executives had never seen on his face. She didn't see him slowly remove his tailored wool coat and lay it across her shoulders with a care that was almost painful in its gentleness. But his bodyguards saw it. The man had worked for Hyun-woo for 9 years and had never once seen him extend that particular courtesy to any living person. He fell into step beside his boss as Hyun-woo walked down the corridor afterward. "Boss," he said carefully, "I've never seen you leave your coat for anyone." Hyun-woo kept walking, his face unreadable, staring straight ahead. "Neither have I," he said. On day 11, a senior executive named Beck stopped Maya in the hallway outside a briefing room. He was Se-ra's father's longest-serving loyalist, and he had made no effort to conceal his contempt since Maya arrived. "You're wasting everyone's time," Beck said, loudly enough for the 3 staff members nearby to hear clearly. "Women like you come in here with your foreign credentials and your self-righteous crusades and leave nothing but disruption. You have no idea what this company is, or who built it." Maya looked at him. Her voice was perfectly level. "Write that down," she said. "All of it. Sign it. I'll need it for my final report." She walked past him. Beck's face darkened. 2 hours later, a malfunction in the warehouse security system triggered an automated lockdown. Maya and Hyun-woo, who had been reviewing a separate logistics discrepancy on the storage level, were sealed inside a reinforced vault together when the lights cut out. In the dark, with nothing but the sound of ventilation and the distant hum of the building around them, they sat down on the floor with their backs against the steel wall. The tight, immovable formality they carried with each other in daylight had nowhere to go in the pitch black. They talked, not about the investigation, not about diamonds or manifests or syndicate logistics. They talked the way people talk when they realize the performance isn't possible anymore and there's nothing left to do but be honest. He told her about the weight of inheriting an empire built on violence and the strange, exhausting responsibility of trying to steer it towards something that wouldn't one day destroy everything he touched. She told him about growing up watching her father be meticulous and careful and good, and how none of it had mattered in the end because the system decided what the story was going to be before the facts were ever examined. At one point, she said something dry and sharp about the irony of an asset investigator locked inside a vault, and he laughed. A real one. She had not heard that sound from him before, and it startled her slightly, and then she laughed too, and for 30 seconds in the complete darkness, they were just 2 people who found the same thing funny. The vault doors cycled open 30 minutes later. Baek was standing in the corridor with a box of his personal belongings. Hyun-woo walked past him without breaking stride. "Your security clearance is revoked," he said quietly. "Get off my property." Maya stood in the corridor and watched Baek leave, And then she looked at Hyunwoo's retreating back, and she understood something she hadn't before. He had been watching, the whole time. On day 14, Maya woke up to her phone ringing before 6 in the morning. Her assistant's voice was tight and careful, in a way that told her everything before a single word was spoken. The headline had gone global overnight. Star investigator's father was convicted of corporate theft. Is Maya Johnson's entire career built on a lie? The article was thorough. It dug up every detail of her father's case, reframed every fact with the nastiest possible interpretation, and connected his conviction to her career in a way designed to suggest that her credentials were a performance, that her reputation was a fabrication, that she was not an investigator, but a fraud running from a family legacy of crime. She read it standing in the elevator on the way up to her office, surrounded by CO Group employees who were reading it on their own phones. She felt every glance. She kept her eyes on the screen, and her face completely still. She worked through the entire day. She answered every question professionally, requested 3 additional document sets, and attended a late afternoon briefing where she caught 2 executives exchanging looks she chose not to acknowledge. She did not let a single crack show. That evening, alone in her private apartment, she sat down on the floor with her back against the couch. She pulled a photograph from her wallet, old and worn at the edges. The image faded slightly with time. Her father, standing outside a building she no longer remembered the name of, smiling at whoever was holding the camera. She had been 7 years old when that photo was taken. He had been free. She cried without making a sound. Just tears moving down her face in the silence of her apartment. The kind of grief that doesn't announce itself because it has been living inside a person so long it knows all the quiet routes. After a long time, she looked at the photograph and took a slow, steady breath. I won't let them bury you twice. The next morning she was at her desk before anyone else arrived, and she was sharper and colder and more focused than she had been at any point since the investigation began. Sarah found her in the underground parking garage that afternoon, in the isolated VIP section, where the cameras had a 3-minute lag that Sarah had clearly already accounted for. She appeared from between 2 vehicles, smooth and unhurried, and slid a folded check into the outer pocket of Maya's coat, with the practiced ease of someone who had done things like this before. Your father was a thief, Sarah said softly, and you're a fraud. Write whatever number makes you disappear before I leak the rest of your family's history. Maya reached into her pocket. She unfolded the check, looked at it for one long moment, and tore it cleanly down the center. My father died an innocent man, Maya said, stepping directly into Sarah's space. And your father's signature is all over the missing shipping manifests. I'm not leaving until I put him exactly where he belongs. Sarah's composure held. Barely. The frame-up came 3 days later, and it was immaculate. Federal customs agents arrived at the 38th floor at 9 in the morning with a sealed warrant. Inside the lining of Maya's personal desk drawer, carefully concealed, they found $5 million worth of smuggled, unrefined diamonds. Alongside it, printed documentation of a Swiss bank account in Maya's name showing a recent substantial deposit traced back to a rival syndicate. The evidence was structured so cleanly that even Maya felt the cold drop in her stomach when she saw it laid out. This was not improvised. This had been planned for weeks. As the agents put the handcuffs on her wrists, she kept her head up and her breathing even. The entire floor had gone silent. Employees stood in doorways and along the corridor, watching. Sarah was waiting near the elevator. She stepped into Maya's path as the agents guided her forward. She leaned close, her voice dropping to barely above a breath. When they close that prison door, Sarah whispered, you'll understand exactly how your father felt. Maya looked at her. She didn't look away. She didn't respond. She let the agents walk her into the elevator. As they passed Hyunwoo, he was standing in the center of the floor with his arms at his sides. His face was a mask of absolute stone. He said nothing. He made no move toward her. He did not meet her eyes. The elevator doors closed. Hyunwoo stood motionless for exactly 4 seconds. Then he walked into his private office, closed the heavy door, and turned the lock. His head bodyguard, positioned in the corridor, heard two dull impacts against the concrete pillar. Then a third. He stood perfectly still, his face forward, knowing with complete certainty that he was not meant to move. Inside the office, Hyun-woo stood with his forehead pressed against the concrete, his knuckles split open, his breathing ragged and slow. He had let them take her. He had stood there and watched it happen and said nothing, because stopping it in that moment without definitive proof would have given Se-ra the time she needed to destroy everything. He knew that. He had calculated it precisely. It didn't make the corridor any quieter. He straightened up, walked to his desk, and picked up his phone. "Get me everyone on the inner council," he said. "Locked room, 20 minutes. The COO started lying before Hyun-woo had even fully closed the boardroom door. It was a polished, well-rehearsed performance, clearly prepared in advance, designed to cement Maya as the architect of the entire smuggling operation and position the vice chairman's family as victims of her manipulation. Hyun-woo listened to the full performance without interrupting. Then he stood up, walked to the heavy boardroom doors, and turned the manual deadbolt. The sound of it engaging was very loud in the silence. He turned back to face the room. His expression was not angry. Anger implies heat. What was in his face was something colder and more absolute than anger, something that every person in that room recognized immediately as the part of Seo Hyun-woo that had made the Seo name mean what it meant across 6 continents. He leaned back against the long table, unhurried. "Nobody leaves this room," he said quietly, "until someone tells me the truth. And if I have to find it out myself, the person who lied to me won't survive the night." Not a single person moved. Se-ra, seated 3 chairs down, kept her face composed, but her hands were flat on the table in a way that suggested she was pressing them down to keep them still. The COO lasted 40 seconds. He broke suddenly and completely, the way structures break when the internal pressure finally exceeds what the surface can contain. He was sobbing before he had finished the first sentence, words coming out tangled and desperate, explaining how Se-ra had approached him 4 months ago, how she had offered him a percentage, how he had helped her manipulate the biometric access logs, how he had been the one to plant the diamonds in Maya's desk the night before the raid. Every executive in the room sat in absolute stillness. Se-ra stared straight ahead. Ha-yeon-woo picked up his phone and made 2 calls. Maya was released the following morning. Fully cleared, all charges dropped, the fabricated evidence flagged as planted in the official federal record. She walked out into gray morning light, got into a car, and was taken directly to the CO Group building. When she walked into Hyun-woo's office, he was standing with a folder in his hand, the complete master audit file, everything she had spent 3 weeks building. He held it out to her. Maya took it. Then she set it on his desk, reached into her bag, and pulled out a secondary encrypted laptop she had been keeping secured off-site since day 9 of the investigation. "I knew Se-ra was tracking my audit," Maya said, pulling up a file. "I intentionally left digital breadcrumbs showing I was looking in the wrong place. I made it appear I was 3 days behind where I actually was. I needed her to feel confident enough to make a move." She turned the laptop toward him. "My desk had a hidden microcamera running the entire time. Motion activated, continuous upload to an external server." She pressed play. High-definition footage. Timestamp, 2:17 in the morning. Se-ra, in dark clothing, using a master keycard to enter the office. Moving with precision and purpose to Maya's desk. Removing a sealed case from inside her coat. Placing it carefully into the desk lining, Hyun-woo watched the footage without expression. When it ended, he was quiet for a long moment. "You let them arrest you," he said. "I needed the confession on record," Maya said, "and I needed Se-ra's father to feel safe enough to stop moving the remaining assets. While I was in federal custody, your people had 12 hours to freeze every account before he could touch them." She paused. "Did they move in time?" Hyun-woo looked at her. "Every account is frozen." Maya nodded once. He studied her face. "You weren't afraid." "I was terrified," she said simply. "But fear doesn't get to make decisions." Now, in the boardroom, with the lights dimmed and the projection system displaying Sarah's own footage across the main screen, the moment had a completeness to it that felt almost architectural. Every piece locking into its correct position. The camera footage played for the full room. Then the COO's recorded confession. Then the financial documentation tracing the siphoned diamonds back to the vice chairman's private accounts. Federal authorities entered through the boardroom's secondary access door. Sayra's composure shattered slowly, the way something precise and constructed shatters, in stages. She looked at the footage. She looked at the agents. She looked at Hyun-woo, and for a moment something raw and uncontrolled moved across her face. I made one mistake. Tears spilled freely now. One mistake. You threw me away like none of it mattered. Everything I did. She looked only at Hyun-woo. Everything was to make you look at me again. Hyun-woo looked at her without anger, without pity, just certainty. I stopped looking at you, he said quietly, the day you stopped being honest. The room stayed silent. Sayra turned to Maya. Her eyes were wet, and behind the tears there was something that wanted very badly to see a reaction. Satisfaction, discomfort, anything. Maya looked back at her from across the table, entirely still. My father died innocent, Maya said quietly. Now you'll have to live guilty. The agents moved forward. The vice chairman was arrested at his residence simultaneously. The news reached the boardroom in fragments, relayed through security earpieces, and the remaining executives absorbed it in silence. 2 weeks passed. The syndicate's internal structure was reorganized. The federal investigation concluded. A formal public retraction was issued across every platform that had run the original article about Maya's father, and the accompanying statement from federal authorities was explicit. Raymond Johnson had been wrongfully convicted, the original case evidence had been manipulated, and his record was formally expunged. Maya read it at her kitchen table early in the morning, holding the same worn photograph. She didn't cry this time. She just looked at his face for a long time, and then she set the photo carefully on the table beside her coffee, face up, so he could see the light coming through the window. She packed her things that afternoon. Contract completed, everything documented, her work finished. She ordered a car for the lobby at 5 o'clock. At 4:50, her phone showed no new messages. At 5, she took the elevator down, her bags beside her, and walked into the lobby. Hyun-woo stepped out of the private elevator 40 seconds later. He crossed the lobby toward her without hesitation, like a man who had made a decision and was done deliberating about it. He stopped in front of her and held out a sleek, matte black titanium access card. Maya looked at it, then up at him. "You're hiring me again?" "No," he said. He held her gaze. "I'm asking you to stay." The lobby was quiet around them. Late afternoon light came through the high glass panels and landed across the floor between them. "My contracts always expire, Hyun-woo." He stepped slightly closer. The composure was still there, the stillness, but underneath it something had changed. Something that had been carefully maintained was no longer being maintained, and it was visible in the particular way he was looking at her. "I hope this one doesn't," he said. Maya looked at him for a long moment. "You rehearsed that." "For 2 days," he said. She laughed. Not a polite sound, a real one, sudden and warm. She shook her head slightly, looking down, and then she looked back up at him, and something in her own expression shifted to match what she saw in his. She stepped up onto her toes and kissed him first. It was slow and deliberate, and held the full weight of everything that had not been said across 3 weeks of locked rooms and dark vaults and warm food left without explanation. His hand came up to the side of her face after a moment, and neither of them moved in any hurry. When they separated, his forehead stayed close to hers. "The access card is still on the table," he said quietly. "I know," she said. "I'll think about it." "You've already decided." "I know that too." Several months later, a new global executive walked into the high-security boardroom for his first inner council meeting. He was younger than he'd expected everyone else to be, and he spent the first 2 minutes studying the room, trying to read the hierarchy before anyone spoke. He noticed Maya sitting at the right hand of Hyun-woo at the head of the table. He leaned toward the senior executive beside him. "Who is she?" he asked under his breath. The senior executive smiled. "That's the only woman who has ever audited the boss," he said, and survived. Across the table, Hyun-woo's gaze dropped to the leather handbag on the chair beside Maya. Something rare crossed his face. He leaned slightly toward her. "May I?" he asked quietly. Maya raised an eyebrow and slid the bag toward him. He unzipped it with one hand. Inside, the titanium access card, a small, velvet box, the worn leather notebook she had carried with her on her very first day. He zipped it closed and placed his hand over hers on the table. "The first time someone asked to search your bag," he said, his voice low enough for only her, "they were looking for guilt." He pressed her hand gently. "Today I opened it because everything I love is inside." Maya looked at him. Her eyes were bright and steady and entirely unguarded, which was the rarest thing she ever gave anyone. "Good," she said softly, "because I'm never giving it back." If this story kept you hooked from beginning to end, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more powerful stories of justice, resilience, and unforgettable romance. And tell me in the comments, at what moment did Se-ra truly lose Hyun-woo? The day she betrayed him, or the day she lied about Maya? I'd love to read your thoughts. Until next time, take care.